Well, good noontime to all of you, and I hope you're enjoying your lunch. I am more than delighted to be with all of you. Since day one, President Obama and all of us in his administration have been committed to creating jobs, helping American business compete, and building the 21st century infrastructure that the next generation demands. At the same time, we've also worked to be good stewards of the environment, making our cars, planes, trains more efficient, and building the kind of infrastructure that gives people greater transportation options. We've made livability a reality in communities across America, making it easier for people to catch a train, hop on a bus, or ride a bike. In the process, we're helping to revitalize the cores of our city. And I must tell you this. Last weekend here in Washington, it was Cherry Blossom Weekend. And Washington, D.C. has one of the largest bike share programs in the country. And every bike in Washington in the bike share program was being used. And it was a great, great weekend. I've been all over America, and I've seen progress firsthand, from Dubuque, where we gave a Tiger grant, where IBM moved 1,500 people into the community. And I asked the IBM CEO, why Dubuque? And he said to me, because it's one of the most livable communities in America. Or to Denver, where the former mayor, who's now governor, and I inaugurated a bike share program. New Brunswick or New Orleans. Our transportation investments are creating jobs and encouraging private investment. We have invested in more than 350 miles of new rail and bus rapid transit systems all across America. Through our Tiger program, we've provided $3.1 billion for the most innovative solutions to our transportation needs. Our Tiger program a new iteration of Tiger, the 5th year, will be announced here very soon, $478 million. And what Tiger allows mayors and communities and stakeholders and innovators to do is to come to DOT and use innovative, creative approaches to transportation. You don't have to go to your governor. You don't have to go to your state legislator. You can come directly to DOT. Our Tiger program has been very successful. We have funded many, many different modes of transportation. We've broken ground on streetcars in cities across the country, in Atlanta, Salt Lake City, Tucson, just to name a few. Streetcars are taking off in America. And we've invested in 21st century rail, the next generation of transportation. I have traveled all over the world looking at high-speed rail. And the one common denominator in every country that I went to, 18 countries, and many of you have been to these countries, in Asia and Europe, the common denominator for high-speed rail is the investment of the national government. Under this administration, in just 4 years, we've invested $12 billion. That's 12 billion times more than has ever been invested in passenger rail in America. High-speed rail is coming to America, folks. We will not be dissuaded by our detractors. We are moving forward. California has been planning for high-speed rail now for 10 years. They'll have a train going from San Francisco to San Diego, 200 miles an hour with stops along the way. And there'll be transit and light rail and buses connecting people so they can get on the trains. In Illinois, a train going 110 miles per hour from Chicago to St. Louis with 4 or 5 stops. And on the Northeast Corridor, over $3 billion worth of investments. Not to get trains faster, but comfortable, on time, and at a cost that people can afford. That's what America wants. They want alternatives. We can't build very many more roads or interstates, but we can offer alternatives to Americans. And every one of these modes of transportation carries the label Made in America, and we have insisted on that. When I went to those 18 countries, what I said to folks, come to America, invest in American infrastructure, invest in high-speed rail, hire American workers, take a shuttered plant and turn it into a rail production plant. And we have investors in America doing that. Our strict Buy America requirements ensure that rail projects, from trains and tracks to new stations, are built with Americans and American-made parts and supplies. Buy America creates and supports good-paying jobs that benefit hardworking families and the American economy. We will always insist on that. That's the only way we put friends and neighbors to work. Construction materials for our new rail projects are coming from railway supply facilities in 49 states. That's good for our workers, good for our travelers, and good for the country's economy. Through everything we do, we have got an eye on the future. We're promoting advanced technologies that help reduce fuel costs and carbon emissions. Under President Obama's leadership, we're making our cars and trucks more efficient. One of the first executive orders that the President signed within 30 days of his first election was the standard that he asked Lisa Jackson at the EPA and myself to set, and by 2025, cars and light trucks in America will get 54.5 miles per gallon. Every car and every light truck. And all the car manufacturers have agreed to that. And on the day that the President announced that a few months ago, every car manufacturer was standing with him. This is what America will look like. This is what our cars will do. This is what happens when you have leadership. Through our NextGen initiative, NextGen is the next technology to guide planes in and out of airports, to save jet fuel, and to make flying even safer than it is today. We're streamlining our airways and making aviation greener. NextGen will be a cleaner way for planes to fly around America. Last August, airplanes approaching the Washington, D.C. area started using new satellite routes, and they immediately began to save fuel and reduce emissions. The new routes into D.C. will save an estimated 760,000 gallons of jet fuel in the first year, and that's like taking 1,500 cars off the road of Metro D.C. every year. And that's an achievement we're very proud of. We're also building our infrastructure in a stronger and smarter way so that extreme storms like Hurricane Sandy don't devastate our transportation systems. We have insisted that rather than rebuilding our critical infrastructure time and time again, we will have a more resilient standard. We have insisted on that. So when we build transit systems, when we build bus lines, when we build roads, when we build bridges, the standard will be better than the one that existed. We know there'll be another Sandy, and we don't want to happen to our transit and our bus lines and our roads and our bridges what happened. And a new resilient standard will prevent that from happening. And this is a good first step, and it will help us save tax dollars over the long term while also protecting our transportation systems against rising sea levels and extreme weather events. But our commitment to more fuel-efficient transportation networks doesn't end there. Last week, President Obama laid out a big, bold vision for how we can invest in things we need to grow our economy, create jobs, and strengthen the middle class. The President's 2014 budget funds critical investments in our nation's infrastructure, furthers our promise to deliver 21st century transportation, and continues our commitment to safety. The President is proposing $77 billion for the Department of Transportation and $50 billion for an immediate investment to support infrastructure projects such as improving America's roads, bridges, transit systems, border crossings, railways, and runways. His budget proposal includes a bold rail reauthorization that provides $40 billion over 5 years for rail projects across the U.S., a national investment in rail. Altogether, these proposals will help us create jobs, American jobs, continue the rebirth of America's manufacturing, and invest in 21st century transportation that businesses need to compete. America was built on big ideas and bold action, like the Transcontinental Railroad, the Erie Canal, and the interstate highway system. We became the greatest country in the world because generations before us had the courage and the foresight to invest in a better future. And that's where President Obama wants to take us in the future. We have a duty to invest in a modern transportation network that'll create jobs, American jobs, encourage business to expand and help us compete in a global economy. And at the same time, we have a duty to be good stewards. And that's what all of you are, good stewards of the environment. And that's what President Obama is. And that's what he's instructed us to do. We must invest in projects and technology that help us reduce fuel use and carbon emissions. We owe no less to our children and grandchildren, and I'm grateful for what all of you do, day in and day out, year in and year out. And you have full partners at DOT and in this administration led by President Obama. Thank you for all you do, and thank you for including me in your program today.
Thank you so much, Secretary LaHood. You've been a passionate advocate for the issues that we care about and a very successful one. Our next speaker has served the people of the 12th Congressional District in California for 25 years. She was the first woman to lead a major political party in our country, the first woman Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, and the very best Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives we've ever had. Nancy Pelosi's leadership as Speaker of the House moved our nation forward in numerous ways, from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act to the House passing a Clean Energy Jobs and Climate Bill. Leader Pelosi focused on vital issues that face our country, helped ensure millions of Americans did not lose their jobs during the darkest days of the recession, and laid the groundwork for American leadership in the clean economy. As the Democratic leader of the House for the 113th Congress, Nancy Pelosi is focused on strengthening America's middle class through job creation, reforming the political system to create clean campaigns and fair elections, enacting comprehensive immigration reform, and ensuring safety in America's communities, neighborhoods, and schools. In 2009, I'm very proud to tell you that the Blue-Green Alliance recognized Nancy Pelosi with our very first Green Jobs Champion Award, and we're pleased and honored to have her back at Good Jobs, Green Jobs this year. Please join me in welcoming House Democratic Leader Nancy Pelosi.
Thank you very much. Thank you all very much. Good afternoon. Blue-Green Alliance, gather together for good jobs, green jobs. Sounds like a great agenda, doesn't it? A wonderful purpose for coming together. And thank you, David Foster, Executive Director of Blue-Green Alliance, for your leadership in making all of this possible. Yes, thank you for acknowledging that I received your award, which I proudly display in my office. I know that Randy Weingartner will be having a presentation after this, and it's an honor to be here with her. Ray LaHood, oh my, wasn't that a great presentation? Didn't that make you very, very proud of what the possibilities are of public-private partnerships, of public role in preserving our planet, creating good jobs, green jobs. I know I missed Leo Gerard, who was here this morning while I was on Capitol Hill, but what a great leader he has been in the labor movement and beyond, and beyond. His mantra of good jobs, green jobs is one that resonates. Now he's in Canada and he'll be back. He's just all over the place, whether it's personal, local, global, national, global. Leo Gerard is there. What a champion he is. And Michael Brune from the Sierra Club. What a truly new generation of leadership on this really very important issue in order to honor our responsibilities to future generations, to have a voice of future generations so effectively in the lead. I'm honored here to be here with each and every one of you. I particularly want to acknowledge Carolyn Bartholomew, who for a long time was one of my senior advisors, and she has brought that public experience into the nonprofit sector. I'm very proud of her leadership. When she called this opportunity to be with you today to my attention, I was absolutely thrilled personally as well as officially. Well, we all know that we come together today at a sad time for our country, for families in Boston, from families all over the country who were gathered in Boston. Our words are inadequate to console the loved ones of those whose lives were lost and those who were injured, but our words in the form of prayers hopefully will be a comfort to them. We will do what we can to care for them. We will pray for all of them. We will offer our support as Americans and as people, but and as members of Congress, but we will ensure that justice will be done, as our president has said. Okay, now as we look into the future, I'm reminded of a British historian, Arnold Toynbee, who in his study of civilizations and his story of history has said that the fate of civilizations was determined by the response that civilization had to challenges that it faced. I think many of us in this room believe that one of the greatest challenges of our generation that we face is the threat of climate change. We have seen, whether it's Sandy or whether it's the droughts and the rest, the clear evidence that something is happening. We know scientifically that human behavior has had an impact on that, the speed of that climate change or the pace of that climate change. Your formula today, green jobs, good jobs, green jobs, not only protects our environment, it grows the economy. So we do two things at once. We recognize our responsibility. We see it as an opportunity. As President Obama declared in his inaugural address, which perhaps before I got here, the distinguished Secretary LaHood mentioned, he said, President Obama did, we will respond to the threat of climate change, knowing that failure to do so would betray our children and future generations. We like that solemn declaration. As stewards of the world around us, we are ready to respond, we are prepared to act, and we are here to ensure a cleaner planet and a healthier future for generations to come. And to do so, we are here to promote good jobs, green jobs. There is no doubt, as I mentioned, that this is our responsibility, but it is also a very exciting opportunity. With the need for action comes the chance to innovate, to grow an economy with good jobs, green jobs, keep saying it, that's resilient to the impact of climate change and runs on the energy of clean, renewable energy. For years, a magnificent coalition of labor, environmental, academic, and business leaders, many present here at the Good Jobs, Green Jobs Conference, have been at the steering wheel, guiding our country toward a future of prosperity and accountability. Consider what's happening in Iowa, where a thriving wind industry is creating renewable energy and thousands of jobs for the state. I saw also firsthand in Minnesota, when I went there some years ago, you were seeing the future with all of the use of wind and renewables in that state. And looking, of course, in my home state of California, which I'm very proud, where our green sector is advancing. All right, let's hear it for California. Minnesota, Iowa, all of us, and California, where our green sector is advancing, diversifying, and growing clean energy jobs every day. The Golden State is now the most efficient and least carbon-intensive economies in the world. The most efficient and least carbon-intensive. I was at the California Democratic Party convention this weekend, and I saluted the state chairman, John Burton, who passed this legislation through the state Senate to make this so for us. We also recognize that shortly after it became the law, there were forces from outside of our state, big fossil fuel interests coming from outside the state, to overturn it with an initiative on the ballot. One of your guest speakers, Tom Steyer, helped us very much to resist that and then put his own initiative on the ballot. So we're fighting this every step of the way. And again, in California, the initiative process is one place where if we have disclosure as to who's paying for the initiative, we can defeat all of these initiatives that are anti-clean energy. And not only bragging about my own state and others I mentioned, Americans in 29 states are reaping the benefits of renewable energy standards that encourage cleaner air, deliver a more resilient infrastructure, and spur long-term economic growth. This is the fruit of your labor. Thank you. This is how we as a nation are beginning to build a sustainable future. But the path of the future must always run through the United States of America. We have to do more, and we have to do better. Right now, China is outpacing the U.S. in clean energy investments, increasing support by 20% last year. That still makes them a net emitter because of all of their development. But nonetheless, the recognition must be given to what they have done. Last week, I had the opportunity to visit with the vice chairman of the Ministry of Energy from China. He's really the leader on this sector of the challenge. And I had met with him a few years ago with our select committee on climate change and energy independence, headed then by Ed Markey. We met with him there. It was a very difficult meeting. It was a very difficult meeting. Why I mention that is because this meeting last week was a very different meeting. I think the recognition that more needs to be done is an accepted fact. I think that the consequences of doing less than we all can do are obvious. Certainly they are in China in terms of the air that people breathe, the state of water, the encroachment of the Gobi Desert, so many things. But I had a good meeting with him, and I just told Secretary LaHood on his way out and my way in that when Chairman Xie, XIE, was here last week, he said to me, when you were in China a few years ago, you told me that in California you would have high-speed rail. So are you going to have it? And I was very proud to say, yes, we are. Yes, we can. Yes, we will. And I said that was because of the leadership of the Obama administration, the initiatives that the administration has taken. And I know that Secretary LaHood spoke about all of that with pride. We could not have done it without state and national cooperation to pass the bill through the legislature, but the funding, a good piece of the funding coming from the Treasury here, as well as issues on the ballot in California. So we're really very, very proud of that because we see it as, again, preserving our planet, promoting commerce, moving people, using the value of time in a much more effective way. We see it as the wave of the future. And as I told everyone working on it, our hopes are riding on you, pun intended. We can't be falling behind. Now is the time to create a national renewable energy standard and lead the world in securing a 21st century. Now, we did pass one in the House of Representatives. Many of you helped us, and I thank you. And just to bring it up again for those who may not be aware, that when President Bush was president, House controlled and the Senate controlled by the Democrats, we were able to work together in a bipartisan way to pass one of the biggest energy bills in the history of our country, the energy bill of 2007. President Bush wanted nuclear, we wanted renewables, just so long as they were sort of on a par. I said, for every dollar that you commit for nuclear, whether it's a guarantee or whatever it is, we want the same for renewables. We were able to come to terms and pass that legislation. It was significant in terms of conservation and efficiency. Markey said it was like taking millions of cars off the road, and it was. We did pass in that bill the CAFE standards to reduce the emissions, and that was, it had for 32 years. There had been attempts made to pass that CAFE standard legislation to reduce emissions, and we were able to do so in a bill signed by President Bush. We did have a renewable energy standard in the bill that passed the House, but when it got to the Senate, we had the majority, but we couldn't achieve the 60 votes. That doesn't mean it isn't essential for us to continue to fight for, because it makes all the differences. And I said, a number of 29 states reaping the benefits of renewable energy standards. We have to have a national standard to do that, so we have some more work to do. Under President Obama, and so many of the things that President Obama is able to do administratively, some of that springs from that same bill that was passed then. But under the President Obama, happily, he set a new fuel efficiency standard for cars and trucks, so that, as has been mentioned by the Secretary, by many of the speakers here, by 2025, drivers will be saving money, saving time, reducing emissions, and strengthening our security by making our country less dependent on foreign oil. And some, as I say, of that authority springs from that energy bill of 2007. Now we must go out there and out-compete and out-innovate countries across the globe. We not only have to do that, we must invest much more right here at home. You know that. That means investing in our nation's infrastructure, roads, bridges. But that infrastructure is important, but also taking us to the next stage in transit systems, railroads, and water systems. Some of our water systems are made of brick and wood. Does that sound something you want to drink? Brick and wood. And so we are way behind, trillions of dollars behind in our deficit on infrastructure, and it's about transportation infrastructure. It's also about safe health infrastructure. It's about broadband. It's about the future as well as how we build broadband. That means, again, that this is a top priority for us, for the Democrats, not to be partisan, but for the Democrats, and that is a core building block of the president's budget, making a $50 billion commitment to rebuild America. Thank you, President Obama. I know that the Secretary went into many of the other details, perhaps of the budget, but of the policy of the administration, turning crumbling infrastructure into beacons of clean energy. All of this done in a clean energy way, a fresh start, innovation as our opportunity. Will create good-paying jobs, good jobs, green jobs, cut down on inefficiencies and carbon emissions, and protect communities from extreme weather damage. But that's just the start. We must also enact our democratic Make It in America agenda to reinforce our manufacturing base, pursue a national manufacturing strategy, and bring jobs and innovation back to our shores. Yesterday, the Obama administration expanded the wind energy production tax credit to help ensure that more and bigger wind projects get off the ground. This is really a big deal. However, we must make sure that the wind turbines spinning across the globe are proudly marked Made in America, made in the USA. You know, that tax code, when they talk about reforming the tax code, we must be ever alert because there are white hats and black hats in that reformation. And these tax credits for renewable energy are the white hats in that discussion. And some of the white hats are also low-income housing tax credits and capital markets tax credits for affordable housing, which are all going down the path of sustainability, because that's a very important place for us to affect climate change in a positive way in how we house the American people. We must support clean energy innovation, helping key stakeholders invest in research and development of new technologies that will set and help us achieve new renewable energy standards. Again, we must make it in America so that families in America can make it in America. If we are to face, if we are to face the challenge, as Arnold Toynbee said, a society is measured by how it faces its challenges. If we are to face the challenge of climate change and determine the fate of our civilization, we must seize the opportunity before us. When President Kennedy announced his initiative to explore the heavens, to send a man to the moon and back in 10 years, he said this: "The vows of our nation can only be fulfilled if we in this nation are first, and therefore we intend to be first. Our leadership in science and industry, our hopes for peace and security, our obligations to ourselves as well as others, all require us to make this effort." It was true then of that initiative. It is true of our need to protect our planet. My kids frequently say to me, "Mom, when you're always quoting President Kennedy, it really makes you sound like you're from another era." Well, I will just say this, because it was my era, right? When I was in school, President Kennedy was an inspiration to us. But I'll never forget the letter that Senator Kennedy sent to President Obama to be delivered to him at the end of Senator Kennedy's life. He said, "When I entered elective office, we had a new young president in the White House who gave hope to people throughout the world, representing a new generation of leadership." He went on to say, "Today we have another new young president in the White House, giving hope to people throughout the world, representing a new generation." So. Now, these two presidents are an inspiration, and so when I talk to them about my generation and we see when I was a student and we see what President Obama, we see values that run true through our country. Today, leaders of science and industry and labor in this room, of men and women willing to make the effort, we all must do what we can to keep America number one, to rise above the gathering storm and to build a future founded on innovation. Together we can ensure that we're first to deliver a future worthy of our children and future generations, and as President Kennedy said, honors the vows of our founders. Thank you, Blue-Green Alliance, for your leadership, for your partnerships, for your dedication, partnerships among you. There are all kinds of, it's like a kaleidoscope out there. I see all different groups that operate on all different levels together one time or another, all coming together in this beautiful array, blue and green primarily, to ensure that we are first. Thank you for your leadership, for your partnership, for your dedication to confronting and overcoming the challenges that face our civilization. Thank you all very much for the opportunity to be with you today. Thank you.
Okay, good jobs, green jobs. Stay on your feet. Let's have a round of applause for Speaker Pelosi. Let's have church. Let's thank her for singing our song. Let's thank her for her support for good jobs. Let's thank her for her support for green jobs. The work is hard, and we are lucky to have Senator Pelosi in the front lines of making a difference in America. Good afternoon. My name is Denise Fairchild, President and CEO of Emerald Cities Collaborative. I'm very pleased to be a part of the Good Jobs, Green Jobs Conference. This is an important panel that we have that's really going to talk to us about what does it take to reimagine, re-engineer, and rebuild America. And we're talking about this in a way that is not about how to rebuild America's infrastructure the low-cost way, but the way that we like to think about it, each of you at this conference, is how to rebuild America the high-value way, a way in which we fundamentally not only strengthen our infrastructure to address climate change, and again, for those that may not believe in climate change, the reality is, I like the way Governor Cuomo said it, we have a 100-year flood every 2 years. So, believe in it or not, we've got to figure out how we build an infrastructure to withstand the extreme weather conditions that we face in every region of this America. But as we rebuild this infrastructure, then we have to also think about the value in that investment to make sure that investment is generating the multipliers that we're looking for, which is rebuilding America's middle class, putting people back to work, making certain they're making decent wages, getting benefits, and building careers. And just as important in that equation is how we ensure the new demographics, low-income communities of color get a chance to have a piece of the pie. So we have an amazing panel today to speak to this issue. And they will address it as labor leaders, as politicians, community organizations, people who are actually at the forefront of making a difference in all of these spaces of infrastructure, water, transportation, utility, in our schools. So I just say, let's get busy. What do you think? All right. So let me first start with introductions. They're, I think, sitting alphabetically. We have immediately to my right, the Georgia House Minority Leader, Stacey Abrams. Stacey's from the Georgia House District 89. Next to our Minority Leader, we have Michael Langston. Michael is the National President of the Utility Workers Union of America. Michael. And then we have Eric Rodriguez, and he's the Vice President of Public Policy at the National Council of La Raza. And then we have Nancy Stoner, and she's the Assistant Administrator of Water for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And then last but not least, we have Randy Weingarten, the President of the American Federation of Teachers. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to start with actually Mr. Langford. Your workers, utility workers of America, are really on the front line, the first responders, when it comes to the effects of hurricanes and tornadoes, and our electricities go out. We're calling up your workers to really put our lives back together. Tell me, what is the state of our utility infrastructure, and what are the particular challenges that your workers face, safety and otherwise, in their day-to-day work?
Well, I'm sure glad you asked me that question, I tell you. Hi, everybody. Again, I'm Mike Langford, and, I'd just like to mention a little bit about the proud women and men that make up the Utility Workers Union. at the work that they do, and you mentioned it as first responders. You know, they put their lives on the line daily, no matter what kind of condition it may be, man-made or nature. You look at Sandy, and I'll talk a little bit about the impact of Sandy and what we've learned from that and what we need to do from that. But these folks put their lives on the line every day, making sure that you have electricity at your house, that you have fresh drinking water at your house, that you have natural gas to heat your homes. So you see, a lot of times we take these, to me, which should be a human right, for granted, and instead of a profit-driven, Wall Street-driven, money machine-driven, and that's why our water system in this country is rated at a D-. That's pathetic, folks. Our electric distribution system is rated at a D, our energy system. So let me just kind of back up a little bit and start out with electricity. I'd just like to touch on each of those elements that I just mentioned. Thomas Edison, anybody ever hear that guy? Invented the light bulb, right? But when he invented that light bulb, he said, hey, we have to have a way to get the electricity to that light bulb. So Thomas Edison actually created the first transmission distribution system in the United States. Okay, we were the first country to have that. But if you could bring Edison back today, you know, and put an iPad in front of him, LED lighting, he'd probably be a little confused. But you put him in the transmission and distribution system, he'd be right at home, like nothing happened, like nothing happened. That first distribution and transmission system was built in New York. So what happens? Sandy comes through, destroys that system. So what do? They build it back the same way they just blew it down with. Does that make sense? There's so much new technology out there. The line loss that we get in electricity alone is phenomenal. Let me give you an example of some of the things that we could do in electricity. The Chinese has created a transmission line that will transmit 1,000,000 volts, 1,000,000 kW, okay? They transmit it from the west side of China to the east side of China, over a 1,200-mile radius. They have a 7% line loss in voltage. The largest lines that we have in the United States is 765 kV. What would you think that same line loss would be over that distance, that 1,200 miles? Anybody just throws a number out? 80%. 80%. Look how much there in itself, by not advancing in new technology like Asia and Europe is doing, could we conserve on generation alone. Okay? That's just a small example in electricity. Let's move on to water. Okay, fresh drinking water due to leaky pipes. And how many did you know in this room that there's still wooden water pipes in the ground? We actually have wooden water pipes in the ground. We lose 7 billion gallons of fresh water every day at a cost of $91 million. That's why that system's rated a D-. Our fresh water and wastewater systems are really at the end of their life. And these are good jobs rebuilding this. Don't we owe it to ourselves as a country to have an A+ system? You know, when you look at those poor ratepayers out there, those communities in those underprivileged neighborhoods, they're not getting what they're paying for, brothers and sisters. And if you don't pay, they cut you off, right? So you can see in the water system alone, by saving 7 billion gallons of water a day, how much electricity you would save in turn too, because it takes a lot of electricity to create fresh water. And it even is more with some of the other types of water, with desalination and so on and so forth. To transmit water, it even takes a lot of electricity to transmit. So in just those two areas alone, we could conserve and really green up this economy a tremendous amount just in those two aspects alone, by reinvesting into our infrastructure.
So, Mike, let me ask you this. I mean, in some ways, you're speaking to the choir, and I think it's fabulous that you're giving us the facts. Now, we also understand, what's the problem? Why can't we get a home run on this? Why can't we get that A+? And my understanding is that there is such a thing called the Energy Independence Act going on throughout states like Ohio and North Carolina and Louisiana, where they're trying to turn back energy standards, portfolio standards. What's going on, and what do we need to do as a community?
Well, in like Ohio, they're trying, they being the utilities, to reverse renewable standards, and not only renewable standards, but conservation, energy efficiency programs. And we're saying we're not going backward. That's our position as a union. We are
let's give
not
him a round
going
of applause.
backward. Let me just briefly, and I know you got a lot to cover here, but I just want to mention with gas too, natural gas. You have wooden gas lines in the ground also. And we've been having explosions, San Bruno, Philadelphia, Allentown, Massachusetts, Kansas City, throughout this nation. But that's not the only factor of blowing up subdivisions and everything else due to leaking pipes and rusty pipes. There's a 2 to 3% methane leak of natural gas that leaks into the atmosphere, which equates to about 120 million automobiles. Just fixing all these things, putting money into it. Remember I said, this is no longer your homegrown backyard utility. This is all about Wall Street and executive compensation. And we need to fix these by forcing the regulators and those in those states to make these utilities, to put the money, to make sure that you're paying for an A+ system and not a third world country system. That's where we need to take this. And that's how we're going to win this, is by putting people back to work, replacing these pipes, replacing these transmission lines, creating generation, and so on and so forth. So,
Thank you. We'll come back. Representative Abrams.
Yes.
Talk to us about Georgia. Georgia is actually, Atlanta, well, 2 levels, making really inroads in the transportation infrastructure. Talk to us about the Atlanta Beltline. What is that doing to the local economy? What's happening in terms of the job opportunities that's coming out of that? Just give us an understanding of how important transportation is in terms of this infrastructure work that we need to do.
If I can, I'm going to tie that to what Mike just talked about. If you think about any business, you've got workers, you've got your machinery that produces your product, and you've got your logistics, how you get it to places. And a government is nothing more than a really large business. In fact, it is the largest business in most communities. And the idea is essentially that you produce workers, those are your residents, your education, your training, your machinery is your infrastructure. If your infrastructure is crumbling, you can't produce your product. And your logistics is your transportation. It's how you get your things from place to place. And Atlanta and Georgia have faced, we, I think, are on the D scale sliding down. We were forced by the EPA, actually, to work on our water. But until they sue you, you probably aren't going to get it done. And thank you. Seriously, thank you. Because I was the lawyer who helped get it done, so you kept me employed for quite some time. But the reality for Atlanta was that we had to address our water issue, but at the same time, we had to be thinking to the future. And at the time, Mayor Shirley Franklin, in cooperation with our City Council President Kathy Woolard, came upon an idea that was actually created by a college student at Georgia Tech. Actually, he was a grad student. And he wrote a paper about connecting the rail lines in Atlanta that had existed when Atlanta first started. Atlanta used to be called Terminus. We were basically the end of the transportation line for the rail system that was coming through the South. And he thought, well, if you could connect those rail lines, you could create a 22-mile circle, a belt line around the city of Atlanta. That would be 22 miles of trails, transit, parks. And if you have trails, if you have transit, if you have parks, you will have economic development because people like to go where they can get to and what's pretty. And so businesses will crop up there. Because they're businesses, you'll find residential development. And so Mayor Franklin made a very bold decision to invest in the creation of the Beltline. It's a 25-year project, and with the help of organizations like Stand Up Georgia, Georgia Stand Up, it's a project that has very intentionally involved the community from the very first day. When I left the city as its attorney, I actually helped design the community engagement process. And the reason I mention that is that because the community was engaged from the outset, they've been able to keep pressure on the city and on the nonprofit organizations driving the Beltline to hold true to their initial promise. Because an idea 25 years in the future has a long, you talk about loss of power, 80% loss of power. Imagine an 80% loss of memory of what you're supposed to be doing. And so what this community engagement project has done is really driven not only development around the Beltline, but development in quadrants, meaning that every area of the city, we divide the city into 4 quadrants. Development has to happen evenly. So it's not just development in the wealthier sides of the city. It's development in all 4 quadrants at the same time. Now, not everyone gets everything at the exact same moment, but there is always a project ongoing in every one of those quadrants. What that has led to has been, I think, the beginning of a transformative opportunity for the city. But the most important part of this, beyond the jobs that it's creating, the green space it's creating, is how we're paying for it. And I think this is a piece that is often overlooked. The city is paying for the bulk of the Beltline. This is a multi-billion-dollar project, and we don't have a lot of money. But the way we're paying for it is by leveraging those pieces of government that are out there that often those on our side of the aisle kind of ignore. We're using tax credits. We're not only relying on federal and state funding, but we're actually generating our own revenue. There are pension funds that most of you are a part of that can put pressure on your organizations to buy the bonds that need to be let to pay for these projects. There are tax incentives that can be taken advantage of to build those projects. And I'll wrap it up by saying this. The Beltline is emblematic of a local government deciding it's not going to wait for the state to decide it's going to act. Because Atlanta and Georgia are two very different places. But what it has decided to do is to find ways to invest now, build for the future, and hold ourselves accountable. And I think that when you go back to the analogy of us being like a business, if you had a business that had crumbling infrastructure, that had broken logistics, and that had workers who couldn't do the jobs they were hired to do, any company worth its salt would have three options. Your first option is to go bankrupt. In Georgia, we're not allowed to go bankrupt, so we're going to have to fix our problems eventually. Some states can do it, other states can't. Your second option is to just kind of chug along in mediocrity, to be the B-, D+ infrastructure, to not really accomplish anything. And with all due respect to anyone out here who likes it, I'm from Coca-Cola country, so I would say being the RC Cola of states. Not bad, not good. No one wakes up going, oh, I can't wait to get an RC Cola, but you'll drink it if it's there. Or you can do what the right kind of government, the right kind of business does, and that is say, we're going to do a capital call, we're going to ask for more investment, we're going to spend money now for return on investment later. And I think that's what this conference is about. That's what the BG Alliance is about. It's about demanding a capital call. But government is the only business where we expect a higher return on investment than we're willing to put in, and we expect somebody else to pay for it. But if we're willing to invest in it, it can be done, and I think that's what the Beltline demonstrates in Atlanta.
Fabulous, fabulous. If you're going to do it, this is the right way to do it, making sure the community's engaged and the partnerships are developing a comprehensive strategy. Thank you so much. I want to go back to Atlanta and Georgia being two different worlds, but we'll see if we have time for that. Let me get to Nancy Stoner. So we've talked about the energy grid and transportation and gas. What's up with water?
Well, I haven't ever met Mike Langford before, but he and I are singing from the same song sheet here. So water, of course, essential to life. There's no substitute, and every business in the United States needs water and wastewater. So it's pretty obvious that we need to invest in those water and wastewater infrastructure that Mike was telling you about, and the D- that we have currently in our ratings. And the good news is that those investments create jobs, and it's great to be here with all of you who know that. So I'm grateful for the opportunity today. So what are we talking about? $600–700 billion worth of needs to replace those deteriorating pipes, the ones that you paid for, that your parents paid for, to build those structures that are providing safe tap water to you and your families, providing beaches you can swim in, rivers you can fish in. But the bad news is that we are letting the systems deteriorate, and we need to put that investment in. The good news is that if we put in that investment, we create lots of jobs. For every $1 billion invested, we get between 15,000 and 40,000 jobs. So that is a lot of jobs, and a lot of good paying jobs for people across the country, all kinds of different jobs. Architects, planners, construction workers, irrigation specialists, pipe layers, maintenance work, all kinds of work, and a job ladder so that people can move up, can learn how to do the landscaping, to do the design, to do the engineering. So jobs for people at every type of work and in every community across the United States. And investment in water and wastewater infrastructure creates more jobs than investment in other kinds of infrastructure. And New York City recently did a survey that shows that investment in green infrastructure, which is the kind of infrastructure that relies on trees, green roofs, rain gardens, permeable pavement, that creates the most salary dollar per dollar invested. And that's because that's not big machinery, but instead people designing, installing, and maintaining infrastructure that mimics natural functions and provides the most environmental benefits. So those investments, they're good for the economy, they're good for the environment, they're good for public health, and we deserve it. We deserve those jobs, and we owe it to future generations to make sure that they have the water and wastewater infrastructure, that they have safe tap water to drink, that they have waters they can use, as we have had from the investments that our mothers and forefathers have made for us. And so that's the good news about what we can do on water and wastewater infrastructure. We're working with communities across the country to do that. We have a new project with the Veterans Administration to help veterans get jobs in the water and wastewater sector. We have a lot of projects with community colleges, with schools, high schools, colleges all across the country, letting people know about these job opportunities. And they're expected to be large as the population grows. We need more water and wastewater infrastructure. As climate change affects our water resources, we'll have more jobs. And we have a lot of people aging out of those jobs. And so we'll have lots of opportunities. We need to work together to train people to get into those good jobs and help us preserve our economy and our environment.
Thank you. So Nancy, Eric, Nancy set you up real nicely here. She talked about the jobs, and I guess the big question is jobs for whom? There was a study that just came out last week that looked at the role of the women in the green economy and found that we ain't there. We're not in the economy at the level at which we should be. Tell us about your recent study and the demographic shifts that's taken place in America and how we engage communities of color in this new emerging economy.
Well,
What are the challenges?
Yeah, sure. No, thank you. First, thank you for inviting me to be here. I think these are issues and areas that we have a lot to learn about, going forward. So having the opportunity to be here, I think, is very important for leaders in the civil rights community. For those of you who don't know who we are, NCLR is a 45-year-old civil rights organization, and we have affiliates in many different states, as well as a presence in many states. As we evolved over time, we know that state-level policy is increasingly important, and we've got to be involved in those areas. And the center of issues that we're talking about here, whether it's infrastructure that helps us in disaster situations or climate, or the promise and economic opportunity that's out there and jobs, is an important conversation for more and more Latinos to be involved in and community leaders to be involved in going forward. I tell people when I came to Washington 20 years ago to work on Latino-specific civil rights issues, we would walk in right after the 1990 census and we would say, look, Latinos, they need investments in education, they need investments in jobs, the poverty rate is outstanding, we've got to do something about this. And we are 4% of the population, take that. And we'll be 4.5% before you know it. So as you can imagine, those who felt very sympathetically and understood civil rights issues were very responsive to those issues, but virtually no one else. And 20 years later, look at these numbers. So we've got 23% of our school-age kids today are Latino. In a number of decades, 30% of the U.S. labor force is going to be Latino. 800,000 Latino kids turn voting age eligible every single year and will for the next 15 years. And so these are numbers that are astounding to us in the civil rights community. So I would tell you, when we see them coming out demographically, it's quite amazing to see. And what we know is that there's great opportunity going forward. And what we've learned with respect to fighting for civil rights causes for our community, and we are not new to controversial and difficult issues. as many of you may guess, is that you have to have alliances. You need deep collaborations. You got to work together, and it's got to be authentic. And I think those are many of the things that and the experiences that we bring. In the scope of these kinds of issues, we could not have been able to build our own authentic agenda around energy issues without the support of Sierra Club, who provided us opportunities to do a national poll, without the League of Conservation Voters, which helped us to do teletown halls and other kinds of community events in the states in key places. We need partners, and alliances are ultimately going to be crucial for us to win on these major transformational issues that are ahead of us because of demographics too, but also because, you know, as a result of our research, what we find is the opportunity is there. And in some places throughout the country, in cities that are emerging, there's some infrastructure, there's some opportunity for Latino workers and community organizations to get involved. But by and large, there isn't national access. There are real barriers to participation. Those barriers to participation must be dealt with from a public policy perspective, hopefully in a transformational and broader policy discussion. But if not, then we've got to go into the states, and we've got to be working with partners to fix the law and fix policies in ways that opens up more opportunity for all. So these are the experiences that we bring to the table as we look ahead and take the long view. We know that Latino voters, Latino workers, Latino school teachers and others need to be important players in solving some of our thorniest and trickiest issues, which include many of the ones that we're talking to today. And I think we look forward to taking on that opportunity as well.
Okay, well, I'm going to push you just a little bit.
Please do.
That is because I have a Generation Xer, young black male, and I have a millennium child. One wants to be a rapper, and the other wants to be, you know, a computer whiz. These are tough jobs. When we're talking about utility lines, energy, and transportation, and you know, these are hard jobs that our young people aren't either knowledgeable about or interested in. Are those some of the barriers, and how do we overcome those barriers to make sure that as we rebuild this economy, that we've got people to do it?
Right, so there's a couple of issues. One is, what do we do with the current workers? Can we get them into opportunities? And there are barriers around educational issues, but also certifications that are very, very difficult for Latino workers to break through. And in some places, quite honestly, there are training opportunities, but there aren't any jobs, or there aren't sufficient enough jobs. And so having those kinds of mismatches are things that we're going to have to deal with as well going forward. Long term, a big emphasis on our school system is going to have to be key. Lots of folks talking about more emphasis in computer science training and math and engineering and other opportunities ahead, and making sure that our kids have just as much an opportunity as anyone else to get into those programs and be invested and graduate and be school ready by the time they get into to graduating from high school is going to be crucial going forward.
Great. And I see Mike blinking, but I'm going to hold, I know you've got things to say, but I'd like to at least make sure that Randy talks to us about the schools. They're very pivotal to both the educational work that's involved, the education and training work, but also in terms of actually making our schools healthy, working and living environments. Can you talk about the role of schools?
So let me actually do two things if I can. Number one, we've all talked about what we would do if there were resources to invest in. And our sister from Georgia talked about a really innovative way of financing. What if I were to tell this audience that a whole bunch of people within the labor movement are trying to see if our pensions can be used for the kind of investment so that we don't have D's all over the place, but we start having A's. And that's what the AFL-CIO with the AFT, SEIU, NEA, firefighters asked me, what we have actually done with the Clinton Global Initiative. We made a commitment a couple of years ago to find $10 billion of our pension systems to invest in this kind of infrastructure. Energy, water, I love that, water, buildings, all sorts of other things. And people thought we were nuts when we said we can find a way to have a financially sound investment for pension funds, create thousands of good jobs, and do the kind of energy-efficient retrofits that we know are necessary in so many different ways. And in the last couple of years, what has happened is that we are halfway to that commitment. New York City, for example, after in the wake of Sandy, and I heard what Mike just said about just redoing the same system, but the New York City Teachers Retirement System devoted $1 billion for infrastructure Sandy relief aid. And the California teachers and California PERS devoted over $1 billion for other infrastructure aid. And just this week, the AFL-CIO, with President Clinton, with mayors from cities all across the country, are going to actually do or announce the retrofit of the AFL-CIO building in Washington, D.C., to ensure that it is energy efficient using union labor. So all I'm saying is that we know if we invest in a prudently, fiduciarily sound way pension funds into infrastructure, if we retrofit and upgrade buildings to make them energy efficient and create those kind of jobs, and then also provide training for current workers to upgrade their skills and to create this new skill base for new workers, that is a win-win-win. And we are out there ready to invest. There is a will, there is loads and loads of funds. The vehicle, though, we need a kind of infrastructure bank, or we need the projects that actually are not taking money from Wall Street into the investment houses' pockets and devoting instead that money to making the projects real. So I say that at first because that's solution-driven unionism. Now, to the point about schools, there's also a win-win-win. To the point about training, this is a bigger issue, which is we are trying to convert schooling from rote memorization and from being a mile wide and an inch deep to doing 3 new things for all kids, not just some kids. I am really tired of hearing that the kids in Beverly Hills can critically think and problem solve and engage in teamwork, but not the kids in Bed-Stuy. We need to make sure that we have the kind of Common Core, which is like the jargon of the education system now, Common Core. But what's behind Common Core is to ensure that all kids, whether they are ELL learners or whether they are from poor neighborhoods or whether they are from rich neighborhoods, all kids should be able to problem solve, critically think, write discursively, and engage in teamwork. And if we start doing that, then the jobs of the future will actually be open to all of God's children. And that's part of what we're trying to do in schools right now. That's why 46 states have actually adopted the Common Core and why our union is full on in terms of trying to get that implemented. Now, we need resources, we need lots of other things, and that's a speech for another day. But if we actually look at what happens in terms of schools itself, let's take schools that are crumbling and what happens with asthmatics. We have right now in our schools, and the last piece I'll say, right now, if we actually helped kids, improved air quality would translate into an estimated 25% drop in asthma, as much as 20% decline in viral illnesses like flu, headaches, and fatigue. So if we found just better ways of retrofitting schools so that they would not be sick buildings, we would see kids in school more, teachers in school more, kids focus more with less headaches, and having more of an opportunity to learn. So at the end of the day, whether we're talking about upgrading schools to make sure that kids don't faint in the summer, or having enough computer technology, or finding a way to reduce mold, particularly after big floods, like you said, that happen once every 2 years as opposed to once every 100 years, we would have, again, a win-win-win situation. More learning, better health, more jobs, and better schools. Thank you.
Thank you. So let me ask you this. How do we make all this happen? I mean, we've got several challenges. I heard challenges at the level of policy, challenges at the level of money, you know, because the $10 billion is just a drop in the pond.
Right.
We have challenges in terms of workforce. What do you see as your challenges? And most importantly, for 1,500 people in this audience, what can we do about the challenges as you see them? And I say, I'm going to go back to the Atlanta, Georgia. I mean, how do you work with a conservative state governor and
State, it's right.
and people that don't believe in climate change and people that are rolling back, you know, renewable standards? What do we do about that?
I think the beginning is that you have to speak to people in the language they understand. If I came in here speaking Swahili, 1 or 2 people might hear me and understand me. Everyone else would be wondering what I'm talking about. And too often we use our language to try to convince people to believe what we believe. My parents are ministers. Their job is to convert you. Their job is to change your soul and make you believe something else. I am not a minister and I don't want to be. My job is to convince you that doing what I want you to do will get you what you want. So when you're talking to a conservative, if their fundamental premise is profit-driven, then talk to them about profit. Talk to them about how what you want them to do will yield the result they want, especially when you're talking to politicians, because our job is to get reelected, and we are best reelected when people like what we've done. And so if you can help us if you can give us the information that will make us seem like we are better than we are, that we can then go put on a poster and put on a flyer, then we will get reelected because we did what you wanted. But if you come to us with language that is not consistent with what we think our values are, or doesn't give us something we can declare that we are the victors on, we won't do it. Because, and I speak for my entire class, knowing that this is a vast oversimplification, we're cowards. We're one of the only groups of people who have to do our job in public all the time. And if you knew that you were going to be on television 24 hours a day doing your job, how well will you do your job? Because the best way to keep your job when that is the principle you're operating under is to be mediocre. Mediocrity is the best guarantee of job security. Because if nobody knows who you are and nobody knows what you did, no one has a reason to get rid of you. What we're talking about is being proactive, progressive, and changing things, and that means we need help doing it. And particularly if you're conservative, because you're coming from a political mindset that says that the government shouldn't be involved, that poor people are poor because, you know, either God smited them or, you know, insert trope here, or that they simply haven't worked hard enough, and we all know that's not true. But if you're going to replace that belief system, you've got to replace it with something that they can hear and understand. And that's true on the progressive side as well. Because on the progressive side, sometimes we forget that money isn't bad. Poor people don't hate rich people. Poor people want to be rich too. Poor people like making money. They like having good jobs. They like job security and taking care of their children. And so on the progressive side, we have to also talk to folks about the fact that creating an infrastructure bank using pension funds is a smart economic play, and that it's not a bad thing to put your money in a place where it's going to make more money. Because the more money we make, the better we can make the country that we believe in. And so I think it's meeting people where they are, speaking to them in a language they can understand, and giving them something that they can declare as a win.
Exactly.
Great. All right, so we have, they gave me the signal. We've got 4 minutes at this point. You each have a minute. Give us the charge. Tell us, you know, your bottom line, how we start making a difference for good jobs, green jobs.
Well, a lot of what you just said is I could repeat, but I won't. The thing is after post-Sandy in New York, we did an analysis. We did a white paper to really look at, interview the workers, the members out there on what went wrong. And what do we need to do to fix it? Number one, it is getting that education to all of our members, to get engaged in their communities, to talk to even the community folks, to literally go state by state and do this whole post-Sandy analysis, because you can take that same snapshot, go state by state, and you're going to find the same issues across this country, be it gas, electric, and water. But really, to get our members engaged, every single member that we represent out there needs to be an ambassador on how this infrastructure needs to be fixed within their communities, get the community involvement, get legislation passed, deal with the public service commissions in each state, go state by state and force their hand to reinvest, because every dollar spent, there's like $1.75 that comes back into these investments, which is good for workers and good for communities.
Good. Gary,
In a minute.
in a minute.
Look, I think one of the biggest challenges we've faced, certainly in looking at various movements, including the immigration reform movement, is that we've spent a lot of time talking to ourselves. And I think that's been the hard part, is that we haven't spent enough time and resource in building the kind of relationships and investing in agenda setting collaboratively that are needed to win on big issues. That takes time and energy. And when things are very short-term and transactional, when you're trying to push something over the top for this period of time, and you're not thinking and taking the long view, it's hard to realize what you have to do. And again, it comes down to having strong relationships, doing the outreach that's needed. My feeling is building deeper collaborative and authentic relationships at the local and national level is what's needed. Walking in with an agenda and saying, support me, this is my agenda, it just doesn't work. So I think we've got to try things a different way. We've got to build a stronger and longer lasting coalition if we're going to win. And again, I think it just takes some time and energy to do that.
Great, thank you.
I think the thing to do is to get the word out. As I said earlier, you folks know that these are good investments for our society. Make sure that your pensions are being invested wisely in these kinds of investments that make money and make our society better places to live. And get involved in your community with your neighbors on your vision for what you want your waterways to look like, how you want your infrastructure to ensure you have safe tap water. We need to get the word out, because these issues are hidden for most people. They don't know what the water and wastewater infrastructure is. A lot of people think their drinking water comes from the ocean. So you have to get the word out, let them know this is our waterway, this is where we get our drinking water, this is what we want for our community, to make it beautiful, to make it safe, to make it a healthy place for our communities, and we can get jobs going right here in our community, good jobs for our citizens in making that happen.
Thank you.
So there's $2 or $3 trillion worth of need, and there's about $2 trillion in pension plans right now. And if we found a way, not only, by the way, every dollar spent by a pensioner does in a community create about $2 or $2.30 of other revenue and generated tax activity. So let's put that issue aside for a second. But if you look at this $2 trillion of pension assets that could be fiduciarily invested well, and this $3 trillion of need, and the need being created in ways or yearning for us to have a better quality of life. And if we found some of the mojo on Wall Street and other places, the alliances that people talked about creating here, and really said, if you come, we will build it. That's a big idea that turns around America.
All right. Well, this has been an amazing panel. We just scraped the surface of the topic. I have to say that within my own worldview, of where we need to go. It's the combination of all that's been said. And this question of talking to ourselves is probably the biggest challenge. And how do we actually go from grass tops to grassroots? How do we put this in the minds and the hearts and make it real for folks, the little old lady in her house, and how this asthma is going to affect her, or how this job opportunity is going to affect their grandchild? Because it is through the voices of folks in the community that come to the legislators who are trying to be mediocre and say, you can't be mediocre. You need to fix what's broken, and we'll hold you accountable to that. So we do need to figure out a massive each one reach one public education program to rebuild America the right way. Let's thank our panelists for an amazing conversation, and have a good conference.
Let's hear it again for our spectacular panel. Thank you very much, Denise, everybody. I would like to thank all of our speakers for their participation in today's excellent plenaries and workshops. We can't do this without all of them and without all of you. And I'm still awestruck, I don't know about all of you, about Nancy Pelosi being here. And so for all of you, remember, this is a start. We have workshops now at 2 o'clock, so it's just a great array for you to choose from. So please enjoy, mingle, learn a lot, and continue to build this great movement that we're all building together. I also want to remind you that we will be here at 8:30 sharp tomorrow. We have a full plenary once again. We have President of AFL-CIO Rich Trumka, Congresswoman Lujan Grisham, Congressman Ellison, and the list goes on. So please make sure that you're here at 8:30 tomorrow morning. And we have a party tomorrow night, so we look forward to the 6:30 p.m. reception with all of you as well tomorrow evening. For those of you who registered for Advocacy Day, we will be meeting here in the ballroom at 8 a.m. on Thursday. We will continue to provide reminders of this. So please don't hesitate to ask any of us if you have any questions. But 8 a.m. on Thursday here for those of you participating on Advocacy Day. So thank you and enjoy the rest of the workshops in your day.